Let's talk about youth ice hockey. For so many kids, it's everything, right? It teaches you about teamwork, discipline, all that good stuff. But let's be honest, it's also an incredibly fast and physical sport. So the big question is, how do we keep young players safe without fundamentally changing the game they absolutely love? Well, it turns out some really compelling new evidence points us in a very clear direction. Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, I want you to just look at this number for a second. 4.2. By itself, it doesn't mean much. But trust me, as we go through this, you'll see why this single number is so incredibly important for the safety of young hockey players.
So what is it? It's the number of concussions for every 1,000 hours of game time. And that's specifically for players between 15 and 17 years old in leagues where full body checking is part of the game. That rate, right there, is really the starting point for this whole conversation. Now, to really understand why that number is such a big deal, we need to zoom out a little and look at the bigger picture of injuries in youth hockey. We all know the sport has amazing benefits, but the risks, especially when it comes to head injuries, are a huge concern for everyone involved: parents, coaches, and of course, the players themselves. To put it into context, when you look at all youth team sports, ice hockey is right up there with sports like rugby and American football for having one of the highest rates of concussion. It's wild, but some data suggests that nearly half of all injuries for team players are concussions. And that's a statistic that has, for good reason, really gotten researchers' attention. And so that conversation almost always comes back to one specific action: body checking. We all know what it is, right? It's a key part of the game at the higher levels, that intentional, forceful contact to separate a player from the puck. But the debate has been going on for years. At what age and at what level is it really appropriate and safe? So how in the world do you actually measure the impact of a rule like that? Well, researchers in Canada stumbled upon what you might call a perfect natural experiment. For a few seasons, you had different leagues for 15 to 17-year-olds playing with two different rule books. Some allowed body checking and some didn't. It was the perfect setup to compare them head to head. This was the big question they wanted to answer. It sounds simple, but the answer could change everything. Could one single policy change make the game dramatically safer? They decided to gather a ton of data to find out for sure. And look, this wasn't some small-scale thing. They tracked 52 different teams where body checking was allowed, which covered over 670 seasons for individual players. And they compared that to 44 teams where it was banned, covering over 450 player seasons. So yeah, this was a really robust, real-world study. All right, so the stage is set. We've got two big groups of players with one key difference in the rules. So what did the numbers actually show? Well, this is where things get incredibly clear. Just look at this chart. It tells you so much of the story at a glance. In the leagues that allowed body checking, the overall injury rate was almost 13 per 1,000 game hours. But in the leagues without it, that number plummets to just over 5. The difference between those two bars is it's massive. And that visual difference translates to this right here: a 62% reduction in the overall rate of injuries during games. That is a huge drop. It shows that this one policy change has a direct and really significant effect on keeping players safer. Okay, so that brings us to the most important question, right? What about head injuries? What about concussions? Well, the results here were just as dramatic. Banning body checking was linked to a 51% lower rate of game-related concussions. Let me say that again. It cut the risk of a player getting a concussion in half. But this might be the most jaw-dropping number of all. When the researchers looked at only the most severe concussions, we're talking about injuries that kept a player out for more than 10 days, they saw a 95% reduction. The most dangerous, most damaging head injuries were basically eliminated. Okay, so these percentages are powerful, for sure. But what does that actually mean in the real world for all the kids playing hockey every year? Well, the researchers decided to figure that out too. 7,326. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the number of injuries we're talking about preventing. And that's not a one-time thing. We're talking every single year. If this rule change was made nationwide in Canada for all non-elite leagues in this age group, we could prevent over 7,000 injuries. The potential impact here is just enormous. So where does that leave us? I mean, the evidence is pretty clear, isn't it? It points directly to a clear and effective way to make hockey safer.
This data gives sports organizations a really powerful, evidence-based reason to change the rules of the game. And you don't have to take my word for it. This quote from the researchers who did the study says it all. The results aren't fuzzy or ambiguous. They're direct, they're clear, and they point to a specific action that leads to a massive drop in injuries and, most importantly, in concussions. And really, that's the bottom line. This isn't just about tweaking a rule in a game. This is about protecting the health and future of thousands of young athletes. It's a public health issue, and the research shows that there's a huge positive impact just waiting to be made. So it kind of leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? This research gives us an amazing blueprint for making hockey safer. But the bigger question is, how can we take this same idea, using clear evidence to guide policy, and use it to protect young athletes in all the sports they love to play?